welcome to the first AIMI happy hour. I think we're going to be in for a treat. We've got an amazing panel of guests, a lot of things to talk about. But I think I'll start out with just saying, why are we here? What is this? And what are we going to do today? So the history behind this really started with the fact that, we have wonderful conversations every time many of us on this panel get together at various meetings. But a lot of those conversations are happening after a talk or maybe in the panel section, and they're really not brought to the foreground of some of the things that we believe are really exciting to talk about, and the kinds of things that energize us and get us excited to do the work that we do. So the idea here is that we would kind of engage in that casual conversation, but with all of you as well, all of you that have joined us, and the hopes is that we can have a really productive conversation, bring up some interesting topics, maybe touch on some controversy, learn a little bit about each other, because that's always the fun part too. And so that's the plan. Again, it's casual. It's a very happy hour. I debated whether to wear a Hawaiian shirt. You can see Akshay is in Hawaii, apparently.
Embracing it.
And so we're just gonna dive right in. We've gotten some questions from a lot of you out there, and we're really excited to answer them and talk about them, and have each panelist just say a couple things about themselves, so everyone's level set, and then we'll get started. Akshay, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name's Akshay. I'm an instructor at Stanford. I'm mostly interested in using deep learning-based applications for generating medical images as well as doing analysis. So I'm very excited to have a star-studded cast here. And maybe for the attendees of the seminar, if you have any questions, just feel free to post them in the chat. I'll try to monitor them, and I'll try to ask when is appropriate. But maybe we can have our guests introduce themselves. Maybe we can start with Luke, because you're the first one on my screen.
Right, hi everyone. Yeah, I'm Luke. So I'm a radiologist. I'm an AI researcher as well. Work at the Australian Institute for Machine Learning. So I'm down in starting to be sunny Adelaide at 7:30 a.m. on a Saturday morning, and I've decided to join in. I've got a little South Australian beer here. We'll see how that goes at this time of day, though. So you might see me drink or not.
Perfect breakfast beer. Judy, do you mind saying a few words about yourself?
Yes, I'm Judy. I'm based out of Emory, Atlanta, and I am an interventional radiologist for adults, unlike some other people. But I also have an appointment in informatics, and I believe AI will save us all. That's it. That's a full stop.
We may just have to end right there. That's about as good as it gets, actually.
Thank you for coming.
Done.
Maybe Hugh, do you mind going next?
Okay, I'm Hugh. I was a radiologist, but I haven't looked at a scan for about 3 years now, and I'm just making it up as I go along. What do I do now? I run a company which helps medical device startups get through regulation, get investment, and do their sort of clinical study design and reporting.
And what time is it there, Hugh? Just so everyone can appreciate where his mental state is. Luke is at early morning. Where are you?
It's 11 p.m. here in the UK, so quiet as a mouse.
Thank you for making the sacrifice, sir. That's very late. Thank you. And
Sharon, yeah.
Hi, I'm Sharon. Definitely not a doctor, but have been working closely with Matt on a few projects in the past, and I'm an ML researcher.
And what is everyone drinking? I guess that's one of the things we're trying to cover. I should have probably said, I am super boring, but I'm also on call, so I'm just having a Coke, unfortunately. But I'm a sort of a pediatrician, so really anything with lots of sugar is cool for me. That's my bag. How about you guys?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Sorry to disappoint.
Oh, hoping for a fine wine or something there.
I have a Berliner Weiss right here, a guava sour beer.
Nice.
Classic Friday afternoon.
Nice. So tropical.
Well, at least I'm not the only one, even though it's early morning here then.
Yeah, I got your back.
I'll shout it out. This is a South Australian beer brewed in Port Adelaide. It's called Pirate Life. It's a slightly yeasty IPA. It's nice.
In a few minutes, there'll be some tea here, not Kenyan tea, but this is like a ginger thing that's very refreshing at the end of the day. So I may disappear from the screen for a few minutes to go get my hot one. But that's it.
I remember when I lived in the South, I used to, I didn't know anything. I would say, hey, can I have an iced tea? And they would give me this glass that half of it was sugar. Like you can see it. You can see the sugar.
Oh.
And I was like, huh. So I said, hey, can I get one of those without all that in there? No, that's not how we do these things here. So I became a sugar addict, I think, because of my time in North Carolina. So now it's all Coca-Cola.
Iced tea, don't even start.
Oh yeah, that's an abomination on an abomination.
Oh, tea should be hot.
And with milk, right?
But yet the water should be lukewarm, right? Like no ice in the water either. Is that right?
Oh, I have no idea.
I heard that.
Hugh,
Yeah.
What do you think of kombucha?
I don't even know what kombucha is.
I was going to impress with kombucha, home brewed, actually.
This is some Silicon Valley thing, isn't it?
Actually,
we don't have tea anymore.
Actually,
Just kombucha.
full disclosure on the Silicon Valley drink, we could have brought out Soylent, which is actually a Silicon Valley drink that I have no idea, but it is actually a
right
thing.
here.
Oh no!
Yeah.
Oh my! What's that?
What's Soylent?
I have a crate of it, just like right here.
Meal replacement shake you.
Why would you want to replace your meals? Meals are the best thing about living. You don't want to replace them with
Optimize your life, Hugh. Optimize your life.
Oh,
I'm too busy writing code to leave my desk.
I like to say that the Soylent is actually just made up of ground up VC cash and water. That's all it's in there.
Yeah.
Delicious.
All right. So the point of this is not for us to all tell each other jokes and goof around. It's actually to answer some of your questions. We have a bunch of them that we want to dive right into and hopefully engage in some fun conversation. Akshay, do you have a list of some of the questions? I think we've got some from the folks that have joined us, and then we have a bunch loaded up for all of you as well in case we start talking about drinks again.
Yeah, I have quite a few questions, but maybe just to get the ball rolling, why don't we have our panelists just tell us about what got them interested in AI and medical imaging? And hopefully they'll get the juices flowing.
I'll start. I fell into it completely by accident. So in the UK, when you finish your training as a radiologist, you're meant to go straight to a consultant, which is like the equivalent of an attending. But I didn't feel like I wanted to do that straight away, so I wanted to go and do some research. And you could apply to do research, and you had to write what you wanted to do. And I had no idea. And the day before I wrote my application, I read a paper by a chap called Olaf Ronneberger. I always spoonerize it. I think he works at Google, and he wrote a paper on segmentation networks. And then I thought, well, I'm pretty good at reading prostate MRI, but I'm really bored of like drawing where the cancer is. I wonder if we can segment things out. So I just wrote saying I'd like to study this. And then I spent 2 years doing it. I was paired up with a data scientist, and we segmented prostate MR. And this was before AI suddenly became a thing. So I was there completely by accident because I read one paper. That's why I got into it.
Yeah,
Stunned silence. Everyone's silent. Like,
I was just thinking to myself that like how many tasks that we do in research, not even a part of our daily life, that were so horrible and boring that are now super useful, like ROI measuring, segmentation. It was NLP, but similar kind of a story. I was so tired of reading reports and trying to make them into structured data that I just said, there's got to be a better way. That's very similar, just all these things that we used to do. And now it's like, wow, this is really exciting research. But it really is just a small change, right? In terms of how we're doing these things.
Exactly. And you can't predict when the next thing is going to come along. And the next thing will come along. I'm kind of tired of the term AI a little bit now.
The next thing is here, Hugh, man,
everywhere.
called COVID.
Yeah, I'm bored of COVID as well. Yeah.
We were
you
going to
gotta
call
create
this
the new
webinar, is COVID the AI of diseases? That was going to be the initial sort of theme, but I think we're probably going too far there.
Let's find out how the others got into AI first. Come on.
Yeah.
Well, I'm quite the opposite, actually. So I was in AI first, working on generative models and just general computer vision. And I thought, well, do I really want to apply this to mass surveillance? Not really. So I thought about, what are ways in which this technology could actually help people? And I found Andrew's work, which is my advisor, Andrew Ng, who was collaborating with Matt at the time. And yeah, started diving into medical imaging and finding that AI could probably help.
Yeah, and I think that it's really cool to see, and Sharon, you're a great example of this. I mean, I think that with all these different talents, it's a very useful skill set, and there's so many industries that would say we would take this in a second. We want to use this now, and the idea that healthcare seems to be bubbling to the top often is great, because I think there's so many things that we can do. So that's really terrific. Luke, what about you? How did you start?
Kind of similar to Hugh, got to the end of my training and was very interested in technology. It was right sort of at the start. I kind of started seeing a few news stories around the AlexNet era and thought, oh, it'd be great to get involved in that. And like Hugh, paired up with data science, computer science type people. And then a couple of months into trying to do a project with them, they were supervising a whole bunch of other students and so on, and they were very busy. And just realized that maybe I could do the coding and such myself as well. And so from there, just started learning much more expansively about the topic rather than just sort of doing the image stuff. So yeah, from there, years down the track now, it's the main sort of focus of my academic life. And yeah, building a team down here now. I was going to say regarding Sharon's story, one of the greatest things I think happens in Stanford is that there's this real interest among the computer science people to do applied work. Often you see around computer science departments that everyone's very interested in theory and they want to get into the theoretical conferences, but the Stanford team over there does a lot of work that gets into the medical journals. And I find that a really exciting way to balance both sides of the topic.
How about you, Judy? What got you into AI and medical imaging?
Well, I'm not so sure I'm yet into AI, but so actually mine was a radiology resident, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And as you know, some of the papers that actually one came from Stanford was that AI was better than radiologists for pneumonia. But it was at least that's what the press.
Hey, Judy, which paper was that again? I don't remember anything about this.
Trying to get more brand recognition.
I was like, who are these people? Like, who gives the audacity to be like, oh man, we're better than. I was like, only Stanford people can do this. So and then the ACR, which is the American College of Radiology, then had this huge panic, right? And all these residents were saying, we're never going to radiology. There's no future for this specialty. And I was like, man, I have to see myself in this thing. So then I actually, later on, Jeremy Howard was doing his first class and he does this first lesson. I was like, oh my God, it only took 4 lines to do that. I was like, okay, maybe there's something here. And so I started off a little bit on an advocacy side to figure out what was the hype and what's the reality. And so I spent quite some time actually not writing anything, but learning and reaching out and organizing this residence journal club, which was also sort of like informal where we could have scientists and clinician talk. And so sort of, I would say right place, right time, which is pretty much the story of my life. But now I do enjoy a lot of basics informatics, and I see my role in AI as still fundamental, like what I learned in informatics, which is to build the foundation for safe AI in clinical care. So I do think that there's a role for AI, but I do think that there'll be a lot of harm done if some people don't do like the plumbing work, which is not usually sexy and rewarded. And so that's where I see my role.
Yeah, I think that I think you brought up two things that I think, well, maybe three even, that are really, I think, come up all the time, and even were some of the themes of the questions, which is, a lot of people go from the coding and medicine sort of debate where they're like, okay, do you need to go back to linear algebra and calculus and then get a CS degree in order to, do the work in this field? And then that tends to be kind of like a barrier, I feel like, for a lot of, at least around here. I mean, we have tons of clinicians with great ideas. They're hearing about these things in all different areas, and yet they're sort of, intimidated potentially, or just at least hesitant to sort of come forward and say, I really think this is going to work, but I don't want to go back and get another degree or something, right? And so I think that tends to be one of the things that I find even somewhat frustrating, because I don't know how to bridge that. I think there's some great work happening in terms of making some of the fundamental principles more accessible, but what is everyone's thoughts on that, just generally, that I know that comes up all the time?
What, I'm teaching radiologists to code?
Yeah, like, I guess is it required, or is it a necessity to, if you're coming from a medical background, to have to do that primarily?
No, I definitely don't think so.
I don't think so. Like, it's like saying, should we teach coders to be radiologists? I mean, it takes so long to train and the dedication to do it. And I am the world's worst coder. I can do hello world in Python, and that's about it. My expertise is more downstream. Once the coding's finished, how do we package this up and actually get it out there is what I focus on. And so that, for my money, you don't need to know how to code unless you actually want to build the stuff yourself. And that's my point of view. I know that Luke and Judy are both very good coders in their own right, but I'm going to assume they will gladly say that they are not a match for, people who are out there coding since they were 10 years old, creating this stuff.
Yeah, I think there's probably a couple of, it probably depends where you are. People that are in Stanford and have access to AIMI are very lucky that doctors can just collaborate with this team of really engaged computer scientists. But a lot of doctors do say they really struggle to find computer scientists that are willing to work with them and are as engaged as they are in the topics they're working on. And so in that setting, being able to do it yourself means things progress much, much quicker. I guess the other thing is, you're selling yourself short a bit, Hugh, in the sense that maybe you can't directly code, but you have a lot of technical knowledge around AI. And you need to be able to answer the sort of questions that doctors are asked. You need to be able to decide what a good task is, for example. That's a task that doctors are often asked to do. And deciding what a good task is, you need to know the limitations of the technology. If you don't know that, it's very hard to make some of these decisions. So no, you don't need to be a coder in my mind, but you do need to have some knowledge around the topic. And the further you walk down that path of becoming a computer scientist, the better you're able to match the two fields together. So, there's a lot of people that are very interested in the field that are trying to get involved as doctors without any technical knowledge. When you talk to startups and groups in the space, they're really looking for the dual-skilled people. They're really looking for people who can help them from start to finish across with bringing their medical knowledge into the technical side of things.
Yeah, or they're just looking for labelers.
Sure. Yeah. Which is a totally fine thing to do too. I mean, that's an important task.
Akshay and Sharon, I'm curious for you guys, because you're coming from obviously the highly skilled technical background, right? And then you're coming in, you're saying, I want to work in medicine. Is there also a bit of an intimidation factor there? I've always been curious. I've actually never asked you this, but I've always wondered, like, is there anyone out there saying, oh man, you got to read Netter, you got to understand the entire anatomy, and then you got to, is there anything like that? Or is it just like, oh, this is just data, I can do this?
I think there's definitely a component of that for sure. When I went into it, I was very glad that there was an entire lab setup already dedicated to it, and that we had Matt actually on the team, who was already the bridge, even though he doesn't claim to be. He claims to know neither, but he actually knows both really well.
I don't know anything. You must be drinking.
Exactly. So I'm really glad we had that. But without that infrastructure, I think it's really hard to inch forward and say, I want to have an impact on medicine. I would say that from my perspective, I would not say, you know, like immediately I can impact this and solve cancer. Like I wouldn't go in and say that, but I do think there are certainly computer scientists who feel that way about themselves.
And companies, yeah.
Who do feel that way about themselves. So I would say that the ego is generally pretty large. But I do think that there is some kind of translation that is necessary between the two fields to collaborate effectively. And I think Luke really hit the nail on the head by saying that, hey, you need to kind of understand the limitations of this technology. And what Judy was saying was like, hey, you need to, or like I began to understand, you know, what this technology could be used for, what it couldn't be. And I think that is really, really important beyond just coding. Like that's a completely different skill set. And actually we even have AI students come into the lab and they can't code that well actually, because it is a different skill set, but they understand AI really well. And they understand, you know, what kind of model we need for a specific task. And they understand, you know, like, oh, there are like all these limitations to the way we're evaluating these models. And so we have to understand that. Otherwise, we're overstating the model's performance. And so it is a different thing. And I would probably stress the coding portion less because there's a higher barrier to entry, or people see it as a higher barrier to entry. But if you're the type of person who just likes to tinker on things, then go for it. Like that is probably way more fun. So yeah.
Yeah, my experience. Oh, go ahead, Luke.
I was just going to say, we just had a really interesting comment come in from Raim in the chat, where he mentioned the term technical debt. So he's saying that he's seen a lot of projects where clinicians that can code to some extent have tried to build this stuff on their own. And then as they move through this process of trying to turn these models, these proof of concept models into actual systems that can be used, there's this huge barrier. And what Sharon was probably talking about there was engineering rather than even coding as such. You know, there's a big difference between coding AI and engineering a functional system. I think the same goes in reverse though, that, you know, I've been meaning to write a blog post for a long time about clinical debt for a lot of these AI companies that haven't engaged clinical expertise strongly enough. So, you know, you can have this issue where the systems you've built have these inbuilt flaws in them from either side, and you have to try and engage enough expertise in both directions. So sorry, Akshay, go.
Yeah, no, I think one of my comments to what you just mentioned is that this technical debt can go beyond just academia too. I've seen the code bases for a few startup companies too. And, you know, all these companies are incentivized to build a product tomorrow, get it FDA approved yesterday. So I don't think this notion of technical debt really goes away at any point because you're always striving to do things faster. And I think that can really relate back to the experiences that we can have by working in teams. And I feel like this point has come across well with all the speakers. If we have good, you know, computer scientists or just programmers and pairing them up with clinical scientists, I feel like that really makes for a good team in the long run, because at least my experience was that, you know, I underestimated how challenging radiology could be. I just thought, oh, you look at images and then you figure out what's wrong. But then when I was trying to build some of these algorithms, I just went in the reading room for a couple of weeks and just was a fly on the wall trying to see how radiologists read. And then that really made me realize that there's a really complementary skill set that you can build up. And that instead of me trying to be an expert in the clinical medicine as well as the machine learning, I don't have to do that. But if we create these teams and look at real problems, I feel like working together can really help solve these problems that we want to solve at the end of the day.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the FDA in your comment there, because I see this all the time. And you see, and I see this in academia, and I see this all the time, that people go, oh, we've built this amazing model, and they do a press release and they get a paper in Nature, wherever they want to get it published. And then it's never going to see light of day, because they haven't done any of the proper documentation. It's not engineered to be a software product. There's no general safety performance requirements. There's no software lifecycle planning, nothing. And it costs a lot of money to start doing all that again and do it properly. And that's why I've gone into that end of the AI spectrum, because I've just seen so many companies fail at that.
Hugh, building.
I have to echo that, because again, as someone who has these models kind of lying around, it is not just that the last mile is hard, it's that there's no road, it's just a dirt field at this point, right? And getting to that place, recognizing that there's an entire industry that has spent decades and billions of dollars, the drug industry, right, the pharmaceutical industry, to do that last piece. And that is the hardest piece, right? That's the part we talk about the most now when we think about, and I know you'd like to talk about, is AI, are these models the new drugs? Is that how we have to look at them? And if so, does that mean that we wait even longer? Because I can definitely endorse to you that a code base from a team of students and, in an academic center putting together a model is not going to be ready for a commercial solution, right? That is very clear. So, what does this mean for us?
Well, look, I'm known for saying that algorithms are the new drugs, and I don't mean that like literally they are drugs, but there should be a process by which they are verified and, produced in a way that is safe. And when you buy them, you know exactly what's coming in the tin, and there's contraindications and all the sort of stuff that you need to know about. But they are medical devices. They are classed under all regulatory laws across the world as medical devices, and you have to build them to the recognized standards that have been around for decades and are slightly out of date and need improving, but they're there. And I've seen pitch decks from companies saying, oh, we can skip regulation because we're not a medical device. And I was like, you are, and you're just going to get a massive shock. And I see investors ring me up and they go, Hugh, I just invested 12 million in this company. They need a radiologist. I'm like, okay, what are they building? Oh, they're building this thing, blah, 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 blah. They're going to do a pilot in a hospital. I was like, great. Do they have CE marking? What's that? And it's just like, well, you're 18 months away from getting into a hospital, like, and it's really painful for me to see.
Who out there we're going to get to one of these questions. I think there's a good discussion or a question about sort of the medical culture and how we do have expectations of massive transparency of the data, right? The protocols are always out there for the trials, right? And so I think that's an incredibly important thing, because that's part of this I guess culture class. The move fast, break things meets first do no harm, right? That whole concept is definitely a tension that you feel all the time. I mean, Judy, at Emory, do you guys have, where are you in sort of thinking about, are you going to focus on homegrown solutions because you have the capabilities and skill sets there, if in terms of finding the use for AI there, or are you going to look at off the shelf? What's your thought around your approach there?
So, and this is why one of the reasons that I came to Emory I just felt that maybe there was a potential to do impactful work without competition, right? And so that's another barrier for big academic centers, which what leads to this all small product, because you want to be the person who does it and want to be the person, who's out there. So luckily at Emory, when I joined in, and also this is a phase of cycle when you join an institution, most of us were sort of at the same level. And so what's ended up has been just a fantastic collaboration between computer science and radiology specifically. And so we've built some stuff, but most of the time we do anticipate that in future, we'll probably be able to do good industry partnerships, specifically for collaboration. But I think our expertise is we're never going to have strong engineers who can build models from scratch in terms of, architectures, that will be our core expertise. So that's a waste of time. But what we have at Emory, and I've been to Indiana, then I went for my fellowship in Oregon. What we have in Atlanta is a very heterogeneous population. So if you want to see how your AI performs on Black patients, on different income patients, that's our hospital. We are a network of 10 hospitals. That one is completely in the suburb to one that serves, inner cities, a safety network for the hospital. So if I look at any research that I would have done in Indiana would have been a very homogeneous population. So our expertise and strength will really come from curating data sets, lowering the barrier for clinical validation. And I think that can be our contribution to sort of the AI. But obviously every person has interest, but I would say that sort of is a unification of our lab's activities. And so we are happy to release to work with others. And the time that I have spent, first of all, is just to become a better clinician. But now I see myself transitioning to sort of supportive role, making sure that we have the infrastructure so that when you have an AI model that you want to validate, we just really lower the barrier for you to test.
Judy,
so maybe less homegrown things. And more, if anything is going to come to product, it's most likely going to be an academic industry partner.
I agree. The other thing is, well, so I was just going to say, the other thing is that like every single hospital around the world who's got some computer scientists with them are doing the same things. Everyone is building a chest X-ray detection algorithm. Everyone is building a mammo detection algorithm. It's like, guys, come on. Why don't we, separate it out?
The name be cool, Hugh. The name has to be catchy, though.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
That's based on what publicly available data there is, though. Like, we've still got this bizarre situation that sort of 5+ years down the track of doing this stuff very seriously in academia, we still have almost all papers being published on public data sets. That, there's a few groups that have built their own big data sets, but by and large, we're still relying on these specific data sets that have been explored before and have some issues and are very narrow topics, like you say. So.
Yeah, data. So I actually, love data. Love the, what I found the most fascinating as sort of, again, one of the goons, as someone mentioned in the comments, has to deal with like, how do I turn an idea into a data set that's, workable, right, for a project? And that piece is huge and vastly underappreciated. But I guess, one of the things I was going to see what you guys think about, we have a comment about this too. What is it about? Is it all based because of privacy? Is it because and my argument would be, not to load this question, that there's definitely a profit motive, because I still think that there's this, and I'll just say it, a mistaken belief that I'm a hospital system, my data is super valuable, I want to sell it to the highest bidder. That is a mentality that maybe not overtly stated, but is part of a culture that has been going on for a long time that I've just started to learn more about. In fact, I get random LinkedIn messages from folks saying, I represent a large healthcare system in, blah, blah, blah. Would you be interested in licensing and leasing our medical data on this number of individuals? It just doesn't. So to your point, how do we advance the field when we have these giant barriers with data?
Tricky. There's a massive cost to preparing data sets and to de-identifying or anonymizing, whatever term you want to use. That's expensive, resource heavy. There's a lot of bureaucracy around it. But you said something about selling data sets to the highest bidder. But the thing with data is you can sell it to infinite number of recipients because you can copy it, right? But then the pure academics say, well, you shouldn't be selling it, you should be giving it away.
No, right. No, then that's why I definitely argue it's not oil. But I would also say that as part of that transaction, what I often hear is that, oh, so-and-so has locked down our data. We can't make it available for this other project because we got this money to do something with that particular group. And I don't know whether any of those have made headlines, but maybe they have. And so that is a relationship that doesn't allow oftentimes additional. So then you do turn a replicable resource into something that is now consumable, right? And not freely replicable, and you can't send it out to anybody.
Matt, I can sort of, I think this was sort of like the fear of missing out in the hype cycle around AI for radiology, right? So a lot of people said, oh man, it's the data. And so initially, and I think Kat from your group talked about this, I think at the same meeting, where he said, sort of like this we made this data a commodity, and all of a sudden you just sort of wanted to even hold onto your data even more. And so, and I think that this is a mistake, and I think a lot of people will go down this pathway. And this is a very, very biased sort of objective, sort of aim and approach. If you want to release data, I think you should release it to the public domain. You know, you advance the science, you advance more work done from your group, but also maybe the other way to do it is to build infrastructure that allows you to validate on your own internal data, you know, for commercial purposes. And I do think that infrastructure is still not ready for medical imaging. I mean, we work with this. Luckily, here at Atlanta, we found a fantastic, postdoc who is just super smart and also brings that sort of computer science, like the software engineering portion, not just, just technical ability that has helped us to sort of step back. And we're still a long way to work on this, to build a proper sort of infrastructure for validation, even internally. And so people are obsessed about, holding onto their data. But man, once you start to look at that data, it's just so messy that you have to invest a huge amount of money to clean it, to make it useful. And you always just get surprised. For example, we have COVID data right now that we're trying to figure out how to remove pixel data on chest x-rays. This is unbelievable. Like, why would you be putting PHI on pixel data on chest x-rays? We know that it's on ultrasound. So there are always these finds that you get. And also, how are you going to make this data clinically useful? And so there's the actual element of curating data, but then there's the clinical part as you think through these problems, and you start to figure out that, well, if I'm looking at a hepatocellular carcinoma, that the enhancement pattern varies, and I know that the imaging characteristics that I should be creating sub-cohorts, which is something Luke has written very, very well about, the small groups that help you figure out how your algorithm is performing. So this still fits back to your question about, Matt, about what's the role of people who are non-technical. You just have so much medical skills, but you need to understand the language and translate it into something useful. And that is a skill that cannot be replaced, and so far right now can only be taught by experience.
Yeah, I was going to ask Matt a question on that, and I think it's the same thing that Luke's going to say. What does it feel like to spend lots of time and effort to curate a really nice data set, give it out to the public, a bit of a press release, you feel great, and then someone like Luke writes a blog and goes, this is rubbish, I've had a look, this data's no good.
That's actually how me and Matt met.
I mean, if it was just rubbish, you wouldn't be able to post this. You actually had to why it's rubbish for about 7 pages. Plunged the dagger into my heart the entire time. Yes, thank you. So we spend a lot of time and money on that. I think that, as to Judy's point, learning a ton of things via mistakes and error along the way. And I think we've gotten to a place where I would argue that first of all, let's go back to the original origin story of the NIH chest X-ray data set, right? Which was riddled with, again, errors because NLP related. We all know NLP is flawed, but I think that for the first time exposed how difficult it is to number one, label it something that's by definition not often it doesn't have the definitive answer on it, right? That concept wasn't, the ground truth concept wasn't necessarily something that people knew. I honestly feel like that was one of the big shockers of that. I think the second big shocker was that there's important crap in there that no one's getting because the labels aren't, there's not enough information about the data set for us to learn that. And then there's just so many things that we took for granted. I think that just by putting out a data set, I would argue that even with its flaws has helped us all, and thanks to Luke and others who've looked into these things a little bit more carefully, learn about the pitfalls of it. But I would also say to my own group that really spends a lot of time on this, that the generation of people that are out there interested in medicine that have the Sharon skills, the Akshay skills, now have a way to learn about what is radiology. Here's a data set that I can at least play with and understand some concept, even if it's flawed. And I think that is one of the ways that you can sort of, a rising tide raises all boats kind of a situation, right? More people understand medicine. It's not as easy as it sounds, but now we're engaging a giant community. We're starting kind of a big, we're starting a lot of research, I think, and that's sort of our aim. But yes, I do have to read Luke's blog, especially I wanted to also point out, COVID did not come up until almost 40 minutes into this conversation. I think we all deserve a round of that. Just wanted to make that clear. But Luke, I mean, you've talked about this. What is your thought about data out there?
Look, I think I can, as usual, be a bit of a devil's advocate again, that we are talking about two different sorts of data, right? We're talking about raw data being useless. And yeah, I mean, we've all had this experience that you even go to the sort of governance of your own hospital and you say, I want to do a project. And they're like, oh, well, how are we going to do revenue sharing? And it's like, well, that makes no sense. You don't actually have anything valuable to give me. The data's useless until you do something with it. But then we're talking about carefully labeled, curated data, like the sort of data sets that your team puts out now and in the past. And this data is actually valuable in the sense that, you look at, there was a really nice blog from Andreessen Horowitz recently about the difficulties of AI scaling and so on. And one of the things they say is that AI is less defensible than normal software. And the reason for that is that the actual code itself is not particularly complicated anymore. Most people are using off-the-shelf components, just chuck them together and so on. And so in the commercial space, the only thing that is actually defensible most of the time is the data set. No one else has it, therefore you've got a market advantage compared to other groups. And so I totally agree from, I'm an academic. Everyone here is essentially an academic except Hugh, who's in the dark side now. But, we have this altruistic, like we should help everyone and move the field forward and so on. But we have to understand that for the groups that will actually get this out to people, they need a financial reason to do so. And the financial reason usually comes from having a defensible position in the market, and that's data usually. Hugh's just gone incredibly dark over there.
I know.
I don't know. Everyone in the audience.
The dark side.
Oh, he went to the dark side.
Yeah. Really embracing the moniker.
Just realized it was intentional.
That's good.
So I don't know. I mean, like your team, all of these people at Stanford, probably the most mature data production group in the world, particularly in putting out data sets now. You've released quite a number of them. So I guess the motivation there, you've all said, is wanting to do good and so on. You've also had startups spin out of the Stanford group. How do they feel about this? How do they feel about not having the same defensible sort of position that other startups have?
Yeah, I think specifically, regarding the data versus startup, I think, the startups that have spun directly out of our group, I think they have not to this point been based on data that, they developed on Stanford data, right? That's sort of it's been a tension again from the hospital side and sort of are just trying to take a stance of what do we believe in? What do we believe patient data should be used for once it's already served its primary purpose? Dave Larson, one of our vice chairs in radiology at Stanford, we worked on a paper together, Nigam Shah and others were on this, and it was really just, can we outline some specific scenarios that we believe are ethical or not ethical? I don't know for us, I guess to complete the point about the startups, I think the startups that we have seen be successful coming out of here have been based on what we would call the sort of the preclinical work. So this is how do you reimagine the reconstruction out of case base, or how do you speed up exams and that kind of work. But then also, how do you deliver the model to a healthcare system that someone already mentioned is a giant mess, right? It's a very difficult proposition, let alone understanding the metrics and how it performs. But again, to your point, it does. I have gotten an email or two from folks that say, why aren't you licensing this? Why aren't you making this? Because we are definitely not recovering the costs that go into it. And that's really where as someone mentioned earlier, the tension is. It's really related to the cost. Yeah.
But you could also release a portion of the data and keep some, so it would still advance the science, And if you wanted to maybe move more to a product, then you actually, so that would be a return on investment because people can see, okay, so this is the value and potential. I see Hugh's reaction towards this, but
Look, you're all missing a trick here. Look, if you want to recover your costs at Stanford, here's what you do. You create your data set and you invite startups who want to get their FDA approvals or prove that they can do their thing on your data. You invite them and say, look, here you go. Here's the price for coming to validate on this data set.
As a validation. Well, that's where Judy's comment earlier was really great because there's the Silicon Valley population is probably not a great cross section of the country. So, I would argue that how do we get that data set that actually represents humanity? And that's sort of what we've been trying to do with this COVID effort too. But how do you do that? How do you get a data set that's going to work and really give a good representation of how good your model is?
Just ask him because you don't want his blog post.
No, I mean, to that question, you can't. I mean, we've seen quite a number, and we've been doing similar testing as well, testing other people's systems and so on. Seen quite a number of publications now that show 10, 15, 20% drop in performance as you take a system to another place. And so this is another potential, you might even call this clinical debt again, of systems that are trained on public data, is that this data is usually from one or two sources, or at least one country. And you end up running into these problems that it doesn't translate to other sites. And people think that they just use this and run with it and they can build it. And perhaps startups that have their proprietary data have this problem too, that they've put all this effort into building data and then they can't take their models anywhere and actually use them. So there's this second issue about data that it's never representative. And in particular in radiology, the major problem is scanners, that every scanner is different, every scanner model is different. And going out of distribution in scanners is really deleterious to these models' performance.
This brings up the robustness question, though, Sharon. I know you worked a lot on the right. I mean, that's the thing, right? And I know you're seeing this in other industries. We're not the only ones sitting here having a discussion about this. What are you seeing outside of medicine, and what have you noticed about the robustness question?
Yeah, so I think the robustness question is a huge one for any kind of applied AI in any sense, and it's one that I think the AI community is starting to look into a little bit more when it comes to practical robustness. I think the AI community loves thinking about, the worst case scenario of what we call adversarial robustness. And they love that because then you could prove things, prove guarantees, prove bounds, et cetera, but it's not practical. It's not actually what you're going to see. You're not going to have like one little pixel perturbed in of a stop sign is what they think. They're like, and then the self-driving car won't stop, and it's not going to happen. Sure, you're actually, what's going to happen is we're going to have a stop sign. And this was in a recent talk by Andrej Karpathy at Tesla. We're going to have a stop sign that's bright because and lit up at night because it's for humans to see, but a car definitely won't be able to see that because that's out of distribution. And for medicine, I think Google recently posted.
Oh no.
And how that.
I've lost her.
Yeah, same.
Hey Sharon, I think your fancy background is taking up all your bandwidth. We lost you for that last part of the comment.
Is that a fake background? I thought that was a real background.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's a fake background.
Yeah.
But we won't ask where you really are because that's not the point of this.
Yeah.
You just had a fancy
This
house.
is my desired home. This is the home I want.
I think if for anyone in the audience who knows anything about Silicon Valley, if you live in a house like that, you're doing extremely well.
You've definitely sold companies with quite a few FDA-approved products.
Well, if you own an island like Akshay, you're also doing pretty well.
But maybe I want to use this as a segue because we have a very engaged audience, and I definitely want to be able to get to some of the questions that they've asked. And I will selfishly choose one question that I really want to know the answer to. And David Larson asked this earlier. Is there something that you read recently or came across a technology that really made you think, wow, this is awesome. We need to get it out there ASAP? Have you had any of those revelation moments about kind of what exciting technology we can expect to see in the next 6 months, the next year or so?
Silence.
Yeah, silence.
I mean, I've said this before. The actual core technology of deep learning hasn't changed very much over the last couple of years. And so, you know, we're not seeing huge technological advances, not at the rate we were seeing in the sort of early to mid 2010s. And the improvement in model performance has largely come from the data side over the last 5 years or so. Yeah, I don't know. GPT-3 came out this morning, which looks very cool. So, you know, in the last day or so.
I think a couple rainforests were lost in the making of that paper.
So for the audience, this is a language model. So a huge model trained on an enormous swath of data. And look, I think, you know, Gary Marcus will get annoyed at me for saying this, but I think that these models are actually really cool. They do really cool things. This is now, we're up to, what is it, 175 billion parameters in a model.
700 gigabytes, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it certainly, as mentioned, is an enormous engineering and electricity challenge to build and train these models. But the things they can do, you know, every time a new one of these models comes out, we see models that are better at doing very rapid fine-tuning to a wide range of tasks that we previously thought weren't possible. And so that's the one area where I'm seeing this like sudden, like, you know, 5 years ago, we didn't think it was possible and now we can do it. That's what we were hearing in imaging back in 2012. And that's what we're seeing in NLP now, I think.
Yeah, and I guess I may even go a little bit further than that. If over the last 2 or 3 years, there's been these big pushes in unsupervised or semi-supervised learning approaches. And those are really good analogies to medical imaging data. You know, we have troves of images. We just don't have high quality labels to train supervised models, but how can we go further? How can we think about unstructured data sets? So I actually think that there's a whole trove of research out there. We just haven't yet had the right connections to apply it to some of the medical imaging data, but time will tell, I guess, what's useful.
I've definitely been outspoken about being skeptical of unsupervised learning before. I mean, one of the things we didn't talk about in data is that medical images are just so huge, right? That, you know, we're talking about, you know, 10 kilobytes for an image in ImageNet, and we're talking about potentially a gigabyte for a medical study. And so we've got this massive difference that the way they get processed through these networks must be different to some extent. And in particular, trying to sift out useful patterns out of this data is really hard. And I feel like there's, with unsupervised learning in particular, or self-supervised learning, trying to narrow down into what you might call robust to human experience patterns or something is something we're going to really struggle with in medicine. And we already struggle with it outside of medicine. So, you know, it's just going to be even harder for us with our huge images.
Yeah, and someone in the chat has mentioned federated learning as a potential route for this. I'm a big skeptic of federated learning because, as we all know, if hospital A decides to label their images in one way and they have GE scanners, then hospital B has Siemens scanners and labels their data in a different way, the federated learning is just going to build you a hospital classifier, nothing else. So I'm very skeptical about federated learning.
I have seen something, maybe not yet, but I envision a different role for AI actually. And the last year NeurIPS conference, I think there was a lot of robotics coming through. And I do believe that this is a place where human performance is still subpar. And maybe this is because I'm an interventional radiologist. And I mean, the second time COVID is mentioned here, but I'll tell you what's been happening at the hospital. So every doctor has this many reminders to go get a fit testing, which essentially is for you to get fitted on your mask. It's a pain. At least we used to think it's a pain before COVID, but we now use the N95 masks, and the production system and production system and just sort of the fit testing, it's not very human-centered. And now with the era of COVID, what some people are doing is taking a picture and deciding, gee, are you small, medium, or large? And this is a task that I think a computer can get a much better model for my face, and maybe even in future, because I mean, now in the US we reuse masks, I could have a better fitted N95 mask for me. It would be impossible to imagine of something like that for a human being to sort of scale something like that. A different area is that in sort of like working in procedure rooms and patient rooms right now in the era of COVID, I sort of think about the work that I've done around an organization called Black in AI that I'm involved with. And I mean, agriculture farmers in big places are now using drones to, irrigate and selectively kill pesticides. And so I don't understand why we still require a human being to rely on a human being to clean the room and decide, well, was this touched, was this contaminated? And I even just imagined, at least in the surge here, going through the surge and retraining our frontline healthcare workers, I realized that even just knowing that someone else laid eyes on the room, or even that this room was clearly clean, you could imagine if you had some fancy glasses that could show, okay, there were no fingerprints everywhere, would just have allayed so much anxiety that would have made a tremendous difference when you fear-stricken. So I do see a fantastic area for exploration in medicine and robotics and AI, more than even just direct radiology. Sorry, Matt, I know it's a radiology talk, but that's it.
No, I mean, I totally agree. I think that what we struggle with is, we have, so many opportunities, I think, for improving efficiencies and all these other things. But then it's about how do you get someone excited about the boring stuff? And I'm just going to bring up the boring stuff because, again, if I'm talking to Sharon, I say, hey, I got this cool idea. I want to do automatic mask fitting. I think right now that would be awesome, right? Because we're in this time period. But I think, in the future, I think that's hard. And so that's where I feel like it's a huge role. And I've seen, in going back to the radiology discussion, they're working on some of the boring stuff. They're reducing the clicks the techs have to do. They're helping that. There's some major efficiencies, right, that can be gained with these tools that aren't the quote unquote sexy stuff that I think that we all enjoy doing. Does everyone have that same kind of sense that there's this, there are all these possibilities, and yet is there just too much looking for shiny objects that we're doing in academia? We should be focusing on some of the actually helpful tasks, and as Judy mentioned.
Yeah, I think for the vast majority of when people talk about AI in radiology, they're all thinking of diagnostic tasks. And then, the first 2 years when this was out, it was all about radiologists are going to be replaced. And that's completely the wrong angle. I think it's, as Judy says, as you've said, Matt, it's the little things, the boring things, that maybe the background things. And actually, and this is what I tell startups all the time, these are the things, you're not a medical device. You don't need FDA approval for doing these little tweaks or reducing clicks in a workflow. You can get to market very quickly and provide massive productivity boosts. The other thing I'm interested in is the systems that can help speed up or make acquisition of imaging better, more clear, or faster. If you can do an MRI in 10 minutes, less than that, that for me is, amazing. It causes a downstream problem though, not enough radiologists to report them all, but technology always brings things at a greater scale.
Yeah,
and more AI. Yeah.
So it's an end-to-end
We're
problem.
creating our own business. I like that approach.
Yeah.
I know we're getting to the top of the hour, and for Hugh, it's like midnight. Luke, you're just getting warmed up because it's for you.
Very warm. Very warm.
We've got a little bit over. I did want to touch on that point because I have seen back and forth about this, and maybe toss this to the technical group more, and obviously to Luke as well, to ask your opinion on this. Where do we go with these recreation protocols, right? I mean, if we're taking images and we're making them faster or better, is that, there's been theoretical, comments about, is it safe? Are we going to miss pathology? I think that's still something that I hear a lot, and I hear people say, absolutely not, that's ridiculous, or this could happen with our current reconstruction. What is everyone's thoughts on that area? And then maybe Hugh could comment on the regulatory component of that.
So Matt, I think, timing is everything, and there's nothing like a crisis to help you figure out timing, right? So one of the things that we've known, at least in the North, very different from sub-Saharan Africa, and as a physician who's been trained in both places, is that we love this physical examination, right? And we suck at it. I mean, we're terrible at it. You're trying to palpate someone so that you can document it for payment, right? So what's happened now in these restructured workflows, right? Surgeons are relying on imaging to figure out what the physical and what the action is. Obviously, we may see downstream side effects from there, but if you have a hernia, you have a hernia. I just need to know, can you tolerate surgery or do we need to do surgery? And so you're starting to see these new models of, replacing and challenging because there's not enough PPE and patients are afraid to come to the hospital. And so in this era, then I see a big role of what Hugh is saying about this sort of very abbreviated protocols that are asking a very specific clinical question. So if your question is there ascites? And I can quickly scan for that, then you get that answer. So, in this sort of space, I would think that previously maybe that would have been frowned upon, but I do believe that this question-specific medical imaging, I do think will increase.
So you're saying maybe we'll be okay with not having the full picture. Maybe we don't need to know about every tiny nodule that could be at the lung bases. We just need to know, do you have appendicitis, right? I mean, we just need to know the least amount of information, right, to answer the question.
Actually, people have done work where they say that even just reading AI on the case-based data is so good that you don't need to show the imaging to the radiologist, And so this part, for example, if you come to the ER, you're short of breath, and you get an abbreviated cardiac MRI protocol, it's easy to calculate the ejection fraction just from the case-based data. So why does a radiologist or a cardiologist need to look at that? And then you spend all this time. I do believe maybe we'll be retired, but this will come. I do believe so. You don't have to send a tech to do the scan, and you can get an accurate ejection fraction and determine treatment pathway.
I think maybe my 2 cents in that topic is, I've been involved in that research trying to do undersampled reconstruction for MRI, for other imaging modalities. I think something that I've seen lacking is people have always shown that these things are possible with retrospective data, but showing prospectively that I can, get my ejection fraction from 8 lines of case space. I'm still waiting to see that, but I think it's a matter of time that it will come. And maybe speaking to what Matt asked, is there a fear about losing information, or am I missing some very subtle pathology? I mean, I think we can really embed some of the things that we know about physics and classical signal processing into these deep learning models in itself. That's what's commonly being done in MRI. We do these unrolled reconstructions where we have data consistency steps. So I think just instead of treating things as end-to-end, undersampled data to some image and train some algorithm in between, how can we embed our own information, our own laws of physics to make this better? And then that becomes similar to the algorithms that we've built already. It's similar to compressed sensing. It's similar to parallel imaging. So I think more applications of embedding physics knowledge can be useful, but really showing that it works prospectively will be the challenge. And I think that's where some of the generalization gap lies.
Yeah, it's like we're getting towards that Star Trek tricorder, whatever it's called, where you just wave it over the patient and it tells you what's wrong with them. Yeah. They don't have images, they don't have blood tests, they're just some AI wand just gets waved over.
Case-space MRI.
Yeah,
exactly.
Theranos too.
Yeah. Look, I think following on
someone had to mention Theranos.
We've got COVID and Theranos. That's almost bingo.
It's almost bingo. Look, following on from Akshay there, I think that point's right, that if you make these stepwise reconstruction algorithms that have checks at every step, then probably this can work. And I agree with you, this is one of the most exciting possible applications in radiology. The cost of these scanners is the scan time. And you'd make radiology a whole lot more cost efficient if you could do this. The problem is that, we're talking hypothetically here. These systems are already in scanners. They got through with no FDA approvals, they just got put in place because everyone's thought that this is just one of these behind the scenes things that you don't need to deal with. And we're getting AI reconstructions now. And Rain just posted a paper in the chat that shows that, yes, these things do potentially just like delete tumors from your scans. When you do the engineering side of this, the technical side of this, you have to say, well, how good is my reconstruction? And you use some sort of metric to say that, like how many pixels match what the ground truth would have been or something. That doesn't tell you if the tumor's there or not, because the tumor's small. So you get 99.99% of the pixels right. You still deleted the tumor, but it sounds like a really good result. And so the one thing that I'd really like to see much more in this space is I'd really like to see the teams assessing these systems to be doing much more human assessment of the images that are coming out. You know, taking the cases they think are likely to fail, things with small pathologies, things with subtle pathologies, and checking that those pathologies are still there in the reconstructions. Now, I'm 100% for this technology if it's safe, but we've put it out in practice now without showing that.
Luke,
I'm a bit skeptical that tumors are going to be deleted entirely, because we use multi-series and multi-phase imaging. So for an AI to somehow just miss that tumor out on multiple slices on multiple phases is too much of a coincidence, I think, to happen.
Yeah, I'm happy to lead a journal discussion about the PNS paper, which is making its round. I feel like I have some opinions to share over there, but I'll save that for a different day.
I definitely have opinions on generative evaluation metrics, which is the topic of my dissertation. Yeah. But it's just completely unsolved and very difficult, even in the general case, like not even applied. In applied, it's even more difficult. And beyond just deleting tumors, there's also adding tumors, right? So like these models will hallucinate things and they're not actually there. So what Akshay was saying about embedding physics and embedding priors is absolutely essential. We need to be able to do that unless we expect to have enough data that can model all possible things, including those that are not seen in the future. So. And
as the last comment, I think, is that Greg? That's Greg. I can't remember. I can't pronounce your surname, Greg. But he's made the comment that yes, we need human readers to evaluate these reconstructed scans. But humans don't always agree with themselves anyway. So what is the benchmark?
What do you mean? I thought we're always ground truth. It's
the best human.
We need good people for this. All right, I know we're out of time. We're actually over time. I want to end this, so we started asking everyone what they're drinking. We're going to end with a terrible yes or no question, just because I like to torture you guys and you're my friends. Will AI replace radiologists? Yes or no answer, that's it. And we'll go around and then we'll wrap it up. Luke, go first.
You didn't say time scale. How can I
No time scale. There's no time scale here.
Yes, no time scale. Yes.
Judy?
No.
Hugh?
No. Technicians will replace radiologists first.
Too many words.
It was 3 years ago that Jeff Hinton said we should stop training radiologists now, and then 5 years. Okay, perfect. So we got 1 year to replace all radiologists.
7 months. 6 months.
We just have some work to do.
Yeah.
I don't think it'll be AI. It'll be something else maybe, but not AI.
It'll be technicians. People will start to realize it's actually cheaper and easier, and we can trust them more because they're human.
I like that. Enable technicians. I love it. All right. Well, Sharon, what was your answer? I want to get everyone on the record because someday we're going to come back.
Oh, well, then I have to say yes because there's no time scale.
Okay, fine.
Then you can't
think
prove
it'll be
me
in my
wrong.
lifetime by just admitting that. That's enough.
By the heat death of the universe, radiologists will disappear.
You know how old I am, so that's right. Okay. I want to thank everybody. This was experimental. Some of you had to sacrifice family and friends and everything else to do this. I really, really, really appreciate it. I would love to do this again, maybe monthly. Who knows how our schedules are going to shake up because we're all busy people. But you're all my dear friends. I really appreciate you spending time with me on this. And I had a great time, and I have that same feeling that I do when we all get together at a conference and talk about cool stuff and make fun of each other. So we'll do it again. We'll also record this, or we've recorded it and we'll put it up just in case anyone missed this. And I'm excited to see you all again soon.
Wait, Matt, what's your answer?
No, I don't have to answer.
On record.
No,
He said no.
I can hear you. I'm sorry. Oh, you're freaking out.
All right. We gotta check him next time. Everybody.
Bye, everybody. Good night.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in. Thanks to the engaging audience too. Lots of questions. We'll get to the more questions next time.